Happy New Year's! Can't believe we're into a new year already after our very exciting year last year with lots happening in the Jehovah's Witness and ex-Jehovah's Witness world. Some of it good, some of it not so good. Anyway, I thought I'd make a video, hopefully brief, regarding the Spanish ruling. As you're probably aware if you've watched my last few videos, I've talked about the Spanish Association of Victims of Jehovah's Witnesses, who were sued by the Jehovah's Witnesses. I think they made a claim against the association back in 2020, and so that went to court, the court of first instance. I think it's a jurisdictional court, they call it. I don't understand all the legal stuff, but anyway, and that court case was heard in January of 2023. And the association were waiting and waiting and waiting and waiting for the judgment to come out on that, and it finally came out on December 5th. And it was worth the wait. I've watched quite a few videos and live streams with Carlos Bardavio, and I've said that wrong, and the Spanish Association, and they've expressed been absolutely overjoyed with the judgment. I think better than what they were expecting, really, and they even shed a few tears over it. And there's been a lot of media on it, and the association and their lawyer have really made themselves very accessible and available to the media to talk about it. So I can only imagine, in Spain, I don't know if the average person on the street has become aware of the situation with the Jehovah's Witnesses and the association, but they seem to be getting a lot of media attention, possibly even more so than any other cases I've heard of. But anyway, the judgment came out at 74 pages, and it was in Spanish, of course, but translated into English. It's a little bit hard to follow because the translation isn't perfect, and I found on the one I downloaded, there were a few missing words here and there, and of course people's names had been redacted, so it can be a little bit hard to follow, and it was kind of quite technical at the beginning. Carlos, the lawyer, is, like I said, overjoyed with the ruling and really emphasizing to people that they must read it. His specialty is cults and defending ex-cult members against cults, and he's written some books more to do with criminal cults, but he's certainly been very, like I said before, very accessible, and really getting the message out there that the Jehovah's Witnesses are a dangerous cult and need looking at. But anyway, in this 74-page judgment, it started out with some background about what the Jehovah's Witness organization was claiming. It'll take too long to read through it all, and it'll get quite technical, but basically they were saying that the right to honour had been violated by the association. I'll just abbreviate the Spanish Association of Victims of Jehovah's Witnesses down to Spanish Association. It's a little less of a mouthful. So they say their right to honour had been violated by them in accordance with various laws. Mentions Article 18.1 of the Spanish Constitution and Articles 8, 9 and 17 of the European Convention on Human Rights. And later on in this judgment, all those laws are spelt out for us. but you can go and look them up if you want. What they also wanted was the name Spanish Association of Victims of Jehovah's Witnesses made extinct, so they wanted to get rid of it. They particularly didn't like the word victims associated with their name Jehovah's Witnesses, so they wanted it gone, that name gone. They wanted their associated website gone, including all their other social media accounts, on Facebook and Twitter. They want them just disappeared. And any comments, they wanted it all gone. They also wanted compensation, but they hadn't decided on a figure for that. They thought they'd leave that. And then they also wanted the judgment, if favourable toward them, to be published by the association. Well, they got their wish there, didn't they? Because the Spanish Association apparently has published the judgment on their website. And they also wanted the defendant, the association, to pay the costs, the court costs. So that's what they wanted as per their statement of claim in February 12, 2020. So in response to this, the Spanish Association and the Public Prosecutor's Office, they sought a dismissal of this. They stressed that the association's statutes, which are listed on the website, spells it all out, its statutes, its motivations and purposes are protected by the rights of freedom of information and freedom of expression, which must prevail over the right to honour alleged by the plaintiff, which in no case has been violated. So they're saying that what they have said on the name of their association and what they have said on the website is protected by the right to freedom of information and freedom of expression, and that even then they had not violated the honour of the Jehovah's Witnesses anyway. So Carlos did make it plain in the various live streams where I have heard him talking about this, that the association, and particularly in the trial of Enrique, the secretary, because the Jehovah's Witnesses took offence at a speech that he gave, basically, and Carlos stressed that he was very calm. He wasn't, so the manner and the way that the information is delivered is also considered, like he wasn't ranting and raving and screaming and threatening or anything. He was just very calm and collected and very factual. The information on the website wasn't, wasn't sensationalist or, really, really exaggerated or anything like that. So the association's lawyer was stressing that, this is covered by the rights of freedom of information and freedom of expression. And he all in their response, he also talked about a few things that those who felt like victims of the organisation had the right to talk about it. And they had a right to talk about social ostracism. They had a right to talk about how sexual diversity and homosexuality is a serious sin and the effects that causes on those people. They had a right to talk about the sexual abuse of minors and the Australian Royal Commission, and how witnesses had not been encouraged to go to the police authorities, but go to the elders first and then to the legal department at Bethel. So, and the last thing he mentions here is there is an anti-suicide protocol which try to show that the threat of ostracism can lead to one's considering suicide, and elders have a specific protocol direction in their Shepherd the Flock book of how to handle someone who threatens suicide if they've been attending a judicial committee meeting where they may be disfellowshipped. So these were all the things that the Spanish Association talks about on their website and in all their social media, and supported by experiences, personal experiences of, well, I'm not sure how many people have joined the association now, but I think it's increasing daily. For the actual court case, they had 70 ex-Jehovah's Witnesses supply their testimony to the court in writing, and I think it was either 7 of them that were present in court to verbally share their experience. So their experiences were all to do with these things I've just said, obviously. Anyway, so the JWs claim that their right to honour was violated, and it's important to remember that the judge, I'll read what the judge said about this. She says, "It is important to clarify that no mention is made of Article 16 of the Spanish Constitution, which proclaims the right to religious freedom, nor the organic law of religious freedom of July 5th, nor does it include in the heading or in the something any request that religious freedom has been violated or of a legal entity or of any natural person." The lawsuit was filed because it was considered that the right to honour of the confession and its faithful was violated. So it wasn't to do with their freedom of religion at all. Let's have a look. Yes, and apparently the Jehovah's Witnesses never claimed that their freedom of religion had been threatened or violated by the Spanish Association. It was all about their right to honour, and they said that they also they acknowledged that the right to freedom of expression and freedom of information is very, very important. But they felt that the Spanish Association had crossed the line and their statements were libelous and defamatory. So that's why they brought this lawsuit against the association. Okay. So what was brought out in this ruling is that the right of freedom of expression and information basically trumps the right to honour, because it's very connected with democracy and informing the public. I'll just write what it says. I'll read what it says here. The starting point is the primacy of the rights of freedom of expression and information, as they are essential in democratic states governed by the rule of law, and the exceptions mentioned in Article 10 of the Convention itself. The rights to freedom of expression and information will prevail as long as it is a matter of general or public interest, the information is truthful, and the expressions are proportionate to the legitimate purpose pursued. So basically, the judgment went on to show that the things that the association was saying were very much a matter of public interest, and that to support that, the judge mentioned all the various media reports over a long period in which the public were very interested, and the media wouldn't report on them if they weren't. So there was a lot of public interest. Another condition for the primacy of freedom of expression and information over the right to honour was that these requirements would be met: public interest, truthfulness, and proportionality. So there was quite a bit of stuff in here about truthfulness and veracity, and she stressed the difference between fact and veracity or truthfulness. And there was talk about, I think there's specific laws that usually apply more to the media when they're reporting on things, like neutral reporting, it's called, where they can actually report what others are saying, and they don't have to go and fact check it to the degree that they have absolute certainty that it's 100% true. Well, it puts it in here somewhere. Yeah, reasonable, as long as they've taken reasonable diligence to verify things. So they don't have to get things 100% true, because I think the Jehovah's Witnesses were, I guess, not happy with anything that wasn't, they thought 100% true. But to have freedom of expression and information, it doesn't have to be like 100% factual. That she talked about value judgments as opposed to statements of fact, and said that a lot of the statements that were made on the Spanish Association's website and in person are value judgments, and that these value judgments that they gave, these statements, were actually based on facts. She could see that, and that's because not only did she hear the testimony of those 7 witnesses in court, but of course all the written testimony of the additional 60 or so witnesses, but she also read a lot of documentation provided to her by the Spanish Association. So she got to see all the harmful, all the literature, quotes, the videos, the Sheep of the Flock of God book, everything. The association did a good job of supplying her with all the, all the stuff that talks about the shunning and, not talking to family members and not emailing them and whatever. And so she had all the documentation there, plus other reports in media, all kinds of stuff. She had a lot, and I think that was pretty much covered starting on page 50 of the report. If you want to have a look, it was quite thorough. So she looked at all of that and decided that, or concluded that the Spanish Association were not making stuff up. It wasn't a matter of rumour or misunderstanding, speculation, or just making things up, that it had factual basis. And yeah, she said the existence of any error, merely circumstantial, does not affect the requirement of the veracity of the information. Yeah, so she brought out, even if certain things brought out turned out later under investigation to be not true, that doesn't mean there isn't veracity, so yeah. Anyway, I'm probably really making a huge cock up of this, but I'm tired. Anyway, page 24 to 47, so just over, so 23 pages are the ex-witness testimonies. Then after that, we get into the juicy bits, and I've noted some of the quotes that I found worth noting down that the judge, things the judge said. On page 49, she acknowledged that the Jehovah's Witnesses were evasive when questioned in the courtroom. She said, the evasions of the plaintiff's witnesses in this matter, I think they were talking about ostracism, demonstrate in general that it is not common to interact with expelled people with whom one does not live, which indicates that the majority understand that the deal must be broken. So Jehovah's Witnesses, on the one hand say, oh no, it's up to us, we can choose who to talk to, whatever. But the fact is, when asked if they did, and they didn't, shows that their understanding was that they must not talk to disfellowship people. But I like the fact that she acknowledged that they were being evasive. Page 50 says the veracity of the facts, statements and opinions that are the subject of this litigation is corroborated by the numerous documents provided by the defendant. If the information does not turn out to be exact, this does not mean that they are not truthful. So she found that all the documentation that she looked at actually backed up the truthfulness or the veracity of the facts, statements and opinions that the association had given. So that was good. So from page 51 on, it actually goes through lots of the documentation from the Jehovah's Witness literature, the Shepherd the Flock book, videos, news media and reports, all to do with shunning, apostates, blood transfusions and child sexual abuse. So quite a lot there. The judge says on page 54, due to what has been stated in this litigation, even valued judgments have a factual basis regarding the serious consequences that expulsion or disassociation causes in people. Since family and social ties are broken, they are left without this support. While they were Jehovah's Witnesses, they had no relationship with others who were not, and they have been condemned to isolation and loneliness that can plausibly cause serious mental problems. So I noted this because she's acknowledged here that what the association has said about the effects of ostracism, she can see that has a factual basis and can see that plausibly it would cause mental problems. So ostracism, she could see ostracism as a harmful thing. Barbara Anderson's book, Eyewitness to Deception, was mentioned on page 54, so she had a look at that. Here's another thing that she said on page 57 regarding child sexual abuse, which I thought was worth noting. She said, it is likely that the confession, so the Jehovah's Witnesses, has a different sensitivity today, but it is understood that the statements that affirm that there has been a cover-up for years by those who were supposed to prevent it, or that it was not sufficiently combated by facilitating its commission and impunity, are true. So basically saying that what the association has said about cover-up of child sexual abuse and it not being adequately handled are true. She also noted that on the matter of the Jehovah's Witnesses being a sect, which is the same as a cult in Spain. She quotes an article from, I don't know what it is, a journal or something, called The Shadow of Jehovah's Witnesses, and stated that many experts describe it as a sect due to its forms of manipulation and psychological coercion. So she didn't kind of say herself that in her view it used manipulation and psychological coercion, but she referred to others who said it did, and who referred to experts who said that it did. So here's a comment that she gave that everyone has got excited about. It's not that she, like I said, she didn't actually rule or say that the Jehovah's Witness organization is a cult, but she's plainly showed that they fit the description, whereas they could be categorized as one. So she, after having looked at all the Jehovah's Witness literature with all the rules and laws and system of judging and punishing and everything, she said this: these examples and fragments of the religious texts themselves can be considered in our days as excessive control over the lives of the faithful in aspects that Spanish society for the most part considers positive, such as university studies, relationships with people of different faiths or absence of them, the marriages of people with different religious sensitivities, and as an example of pluralism and healthy coexistence. So while it's respectable that a religious confession considers it this way, the veracity of criticism for such attitudes of control of personal life increases, or indoctrination. Yeah, sorry, it's not quite reading well in English, but so basically things that the Spanish people consider healthy and normal, like going to university, having friendships with people of different religions, and marrying someone with a different belief. These things are considered normal and healthy in Spanish society. So given that that's how Spanish society feels, that then the Spanish Association has a right to criticize these things, and the Spanish society would be interested in hearing about these things and being informed, warned. Okay, so she goes on saying, likewise, the insistence on knowing details of certain relationships, sentimental or not, distrusting testimonies, or the obligation to consult elders first, respecting a strict hierarchical system, reveal an environment of insistent supervision. Furthermore, the absence of a fluid relationship with people who do not share their faith is configured as an element of isolation and social segregation. The word sect is defined by our Royal Academy of Language as a closed community of a spiritual nature, guided by a leader who exercises charismatic power over his followers. Charismatic power also being understood as a fascinating power. So there's probably a better English translation of that, but I don't know what it is. Therefore, although it is not a positive qualification, what determines it is its closed character and followers fascinated by the leader, that is, very obedient to the rules and warnings or advice. So, so she's defining a sect as having a closed nature, closed character, and a charismatic leader who demands obedience, basically. I'll carry on. The recognition of the notorious roots of the plaintiff confession So I think that's the legal recognition of the Jehovah's Witnesses, the notorious roots. It's a weird term, isn't it? Usually the word notorious in English is a very negative word, but I think here it means what's the word? Respected, established, that kind of thing. So the recognition of the notorious roots of the plaintiff confession, the Jehovah's Witnesses, does not weaken the veracity of the statements of all the former believers and of the association that calls it a sect. An attribution made by numerous former members according to their own experiences, because it is closely related to the behaviours criticised and that have been described. And there is no norm in our legal system that, once officially recognised as a religious confession, prevents criticising this condition. So what she's saying there, that just because the Jehovah's Witnesses has legal recognition in the country, is registered as a religion and is supposedly above board, doesn't mean it's beyond reproach or beyond criticism. There's no law to say you can't criticise a legitimate religion. Carrying on, therefore the legal status achieved by the criticised religion does not influence veracity, but rather whether the person expressing that negative opinion is based on some factual element, and in the case at hand it is evident that it does. I like the way that the judge is pointing out how legitimate the complaints of the association are, that they're truthful and they have a factual element. So this is on what I've just read was page 58 and 59. Here on page 62, it just gives a little summary of what the association has said, which I think we'd all agree with. Finally, it is said by the association that the religious confession of Jehovah's Witnesses systematically violates the Spanish legal system and human rights, finding ourselves before a statement of fact that meets the requirement of veracity because it is based on the testimonies reproduced above and from the it is clear that they were conducts in the religious confession that could be considered attacks on their right to dignity, freedom, equality, life, and physical and moral integrity, the development of personality, and contrary to indemnity and sexual freedom. The interferences in these rights are not malicious, the majority imprudent, because they respond to the fulfillment of the divine norm and the interpretation of it learned, and not to harm the neighbour. But from the evidence carried out in this trial, it is proven that many of them have suffered and suffer deeply for their cause. I'm not quite sure what part of that the association said and what part the judge said, but basically the association was saying that the rights, the victims had attacks on their rights to dignity, freedom, equality, life and physical and moral integrity, development of personality, etc. And that this attack on their rights wasn't done maliciously, but due to the interpretation of the Bible. And even though the Bible teaches to love your neighbour and not harm your neighbour, the teachings of the Jehovah's Witnesses have resulted in harm. So that's a fact, and the judge could see that. Yeah, so the judge said after the examination and analysis of the testimonies and the documentary evidence provided, we are in no way dealing with rumours or suspicions or mere unfounded opinions. Yeah. So this is all nice to know that the judge believed the Spanish Association and could see the factual basis for what they were saying in the documentation and in their testimonies. She says the expressions that are the subject of this litigation are not at all trivial, since they involve the attribution of serious consequences to behaviours based on beliefs of the plaintiff's confession. So these consequences are described as social death, ostracism, mental disorders, self-harming ideas or acts, discrimination, concealment of possible crimes, omission of vital medical treatment, sectarian behaviour. And I think because these things had a factual basis, they could not be considered to be insulting, because the Jehovah's Witness said that the statements about these things made by the association were insulting and degrading to them. And she said, no. People should be allowed to say these things in a society where there is tolerance and democracy. Yeah. So the Jehovah's Witnesses tried to claim that the association, since it started, I think 2019 or 20, that it had resulted in hatred and persecution of Jehovah's Witnesses. And that was pretty much dismissed because, as the judge brought out, that the Jehovah's Witnesses were the subject of many journalistic articles and investigative programs broadcast to large audiences on TV, that vandalism and stuff had happened before the association even started, and that the graffiti that had occurred at the headquarters there was before the association. So they tried to connect these things, the vandalism and attacks on their property, with the association, the Spanish Association. So that was not the case. Yeah. Okay. That was page 67. On page 68, the plaintiff provided a series of documents about the apostates to substantiate that the intention of their statements against the religion they abandoned is truly insulting because it's more passionate. What? Okay, so just because somebody is angry, and they're passionate, that makes their statements untrue or not to be considered? Is that what they're trying to say? I hate the characterization of apostates, it's just so annoying. Okay, so page 68, the judge kind of does another summary here. Regarding the classification of this as a destructive sect and the name of the association itself with the expression victims of, and its inclusion in its formal name, and the consideration since its constitution that the confession causes damage to health, puts into question risk the lives of people or generate victims. That looks like, I had some trouble copying and pasting this. Yeah, I might have to look at that. That the confession causes damage to health, risks the lives of people or generate victims, must be understood as protected by freedom of expression, despite everything said being annoying or hurtful as already been examined. Okay, so So there, the judge basically saying tough titties to the Jehovah's Witnesses, that it may be annoying or hurtful to you to be criticised, but this is covered by freedom of expression. Or maybe that. I think it's worth reading. This is all the really good stuff that the judge said. It could be concluded that a religious confession cannot generate victims, but that would be contrary to what was demonstrated in this procedure, since numerous people claim to have suffered many damages as a result of their experience as followers of a religious confession, and prohibiting this term, that is victims, in the name of the association would be an unjustified censorship for these people who freely express their opinion based on first-person experiences. All the declarants proposed by the association considered themselves victims and have been accredited at least as truthful. Practices that are widely carried out and generate a lot of pain and mentally destabilize the people targeted by them, such as expulsion and everything, which entails, since the reasons for expulsion are not always proportionate to the seriousness of the fact. The consequences is more serious than the behaviour prosecuted. Yes, acknowledging there that being expelled and losing contact with your family and friends forever, at least until you return, is proportionately, a greater punishment than, and compared to the sin they may have committed. Okay. These are behaviours that generate damage due to recklessness without malicious intent, since, as the deponents also admitted, most people do so convinced that they act well and are good people. So that's true, that Jehovah's Witnesses believe that they are doing the right thing by shunning their disfellowshipped family member or friend. But this causes a lot of damage, and it's reckless, not malicious. The plaintiff entity alleges that it is contrary to its honour, but greater protection deserves the freedom of those who consider that they have suffered multiple harm to group together in an association that incorporates the word or term victim in its public name and formal reference to what caused its damage, be it a political party, a religious confession, or any other concept that does not have to be negative in itself. So basically, that the victims should have a greater protection to be able to form an association describing themselves as victims and naming the entity that victimized them. That should be protected more so than the honour of the Jehovah's Witnesses. Carrying on, as indicated, all the witnesses provided by the defendant considered themselves victims, and even many behaviours reported by them or published in the media that have been analysed in this resolution show that some people were not only victims of different damages, but of real crimes, such as sexual abuse or its cover-up. The reality of being expelled and what it entails, whether one smokes, whether one reads criticism of one's confession, or whether one maintains a forbidden family relationship, like between parents, children, siblings, or a friendship with a person prohibited, as would be an expelled, disassociated, or non-Jehovah's Witness person, even if that person is not a bad influence, as if one marries a person who does not belong to the confession once already baptized, or as if one receives a blood transfusion to save his life and shows no remorse, raises the question of whether it entails a sanction so disproportionate that it produces psychological abuse due to coercion and a reduction in individual freedom as well as religious freedom. So that's a really important sentence she said there. I'm going to read it again. So she's talked about expulsion and, the reasons for being expelled. And she says, this raises the question of whether it entails a sanction so disproportionate that it produces psychological abuse due to coercion and a reduction in individual freedom as well as religious freedom. So she's not saying that it does. She says it raises the question. So it makes her question whether the disfellowshipping and shunning arrangement is in itself coercive and limits religious freedom of the individual. Going on, she says, it is also very likely that it will negatively affect mental health to know that anyone who knows of the commission of a sin, whatever its severity, has the obligation to tell it to the elders if the author does not confess it. This rule also poses a continuous threat of being reported. There is no doubt that expulsion and its effects is the measure that causes the most suffering, since the family is the basis of the human being and of society. And the application of this norm, as stated in the book Shepherd the Flock, and in other publications of the Confession, and its specific practice in the cases that have been examined in this procedure, this court case, produces the rupture of relationships. Not they are spoken to. Adult children are even kicked out of the house regardless of whether they have the means to live alone. That is, destroys a family in which some treat each other and others do not, depending on their religious practice or certain decisions that have been made in life in the exercise of fundamental rights. In this sentence, it is not questioned whether there is religious dogma for this. So in other words, maybe the Bible does say to do that, to shun. But this judge cannot ignore that it is included as a norm and practice in the text of the confession, and not in an extraordinary or secondary way, but mainly, and then there was a word missing off the page. So she's saying that it's normal practice, not even a secondary thing, but it's a normal practice of the religion to disfellowship and shun people, and breaking up the family as a result. Our Constitution not only includes in its Article 10 the right to dignity of the person, its inviolable rights, the right to free development of personality, and in Article 14, the equality of all and the prohibition of discrimination based on religion, sexual orientation, among others. But in Article 39, it obliges public powers to protect the family economically, socially, and legally. The judiciary is also one of them. It represents a recognition of its importance for human beings. Since we are all born in one, and family ties are a fundamental part of the person, and the origin of many mental problems due to their destructuring, toxicity, or absence. In its positive aspect, when the family is strong, it is an emotional support, a place of respect and affection, of refuge. The person has many more possibilities of being happy or of better facing the adversities of life, and therefore of enjoy greater mental health. The civil code itself delves into family relationships as a natural right, with obligations also derived from it. As an example would be the right to food between relatives. So this is quite an important thing she said here, don't you think? The fact that it should be questioned whether the sanction of shunning is so disproportionate that it produces psychological abuse due to coercion and a reduction in individual freedom as well as religious freedom, and that it goes on to break up families, and that the Spanish Constitution obliges governments to protect the family. So, and she says that one of the public powers is the judiciary that is obliged to protect the family. So this makes me think, well, this court case is about essentially about the right to freedom of expression and freedom of information. But what are the public powers going to do to ensure that a religion cannot break families up? Are they going to, the Jehovah's Witnesses lost this, so they are appealing it, so that the association can continue criticising. But will the government actually step up and do anything to stop Jehovah's Witnesses and other organisations like them from issuing rules, instructions to shun disfellowshipped or, otherwise former members? Can they do anything to stop that? Anyway, the Jehovah's Witnesses also accuse the Spanish Association of causing Jehovah's Witnesses to be stereotyped. And the judge basically said, she said, the people who make up the association do not have notoriety, nor is it a public entity that executes administrative acts or a state, nor is there a climate of tension related to this confession, nor has it been generated as a result of its existence. The association has not had great significance beyond the circle among former faithful. In fact, the majority of the witnesses who testified for the plaintiff had found out after the trial, not before. So, yeah. Regarding freedom of expression, she said on page 71, censorship must also be censorship in our country. So if basically what the Jehovah's Witnesses want, it was censorship. They wanted to shut down the association, to shut them up. So the judge said here, censorship must also be censorship in our country, and good faith, which the plaintiff also alleges, must priority to promote ideological, religious or social debate. Although some expressions are inaccurate or exaggerated, as has been examined, the right to freedom of expression and information prevails over the right to honour, since there is no need to justify its interference in those in a democratic society like ours. So basically just telling them that in a democratic society, criticism is necessary. As she said here, to promote ideological, religious or social debate. So information is necessary in a democratic society, and the association are just informing. page 71, she said, "We are faced with legitimate criticism of certain widespread behaviours carried out by the religious confession of Jehovah's Witnesses, not only in Spain but also abroad." So she recognises the criticism as legitimate, and it's not only in Spain. So, there's a greater public interest in it, all the more so should it be discussed and talked about in Spain. I've just got 2 more paragraphs. "Although it is annoying and deeply hurtful, the existence of the association must be tolerated, since precisely this mechanism of disapproval or criticism allows a certain control, almost like a watchdog, as established by the Supreme Court, so that they do not exceed the already mentioned limits of religious freedom, prevents and helps to eradicate abuses of all kinds, so that confessions and their interpretations evolve and adapt, if they are not, to the current legal system in essential areas such as equality and human dignity, freedom of opinion and belief, among others, and the feeling of the society in which it is practiced. When abuse of all kinds is referred to, not only sexual abuse is included, but also religious excesses, also known as abuses of conscience or psychological, for which, under the pretext of dogmas and the moral authority of who exercises positions and functions, harms the faithful in good faith, since coercion or abuse of conscience produces serious and dangerous damage to the mental health of people, from which no confession or religious group is exempt or immunized. Since, however sacred the dogma may be, they are applied by human beings." Another very interesting. So, pretty much commending the work of the association, that it's groups like them that act as a watchdog and actually highlight the abuses, in this case of the Jehovah's Witnesses, and may result in an evolution where the Jehovah's Witnesses make changes. I don't think this judge is very familiar with the Jehovah's Witnesses when it comes to changing things. Well, they've softened a couple of little things recently, the beards and the reporting of hours. They don't have to do that anymore. But she's talking about an evolution which will give more dignity to human beings, that will honour their freedoms in accord with what Spanish society expects. So we'll see what happens. Maybe they need a little help. Like earlier, she said that the public powers are obligated to protect the family. So maybe the Jehovah's Witnesses need a little encouragement to make changes to their doctrines in order to protect the family. Okay. Only the movements of faithful or former faithful of any religion who publicly denounce abuses of a spiritual nature or sexual abuses or of any kind, discrimination or degrading treatment, irregularities, etc., can ensure that they disappear or that their functioning improves, or evolve the practice where appropriate. Limiting freedom of expression would be to ignore, in addition to the power and influence that the group exercises over the individual, the ecclesial organisation of the religion in conflict itself, its hierarchy, its economic means, etc., which leave the faithful in a vulnerable situation to exercise legitimate criticism or denounce abuses or excesses of all kinds. That did not read very well in English. But basically saying that it's groups like the Spanish Association that are necessary to publicly denounce behaviour that is violating the rights of people. However, she says only the movements of faithful or former faithful can ensure that these abuses disappear, etc. Well, I'd like to think it's more than just up to former members. She has already said, as I just said before, that the public powers are obligated. Article 39 obliges public powers to protect the family. So I would like to think that the public powers would actually take some action as well, not just leave it up to former members to make a lot of noise and inconvenience. Like the Jehovah's Witnesses, they haven't really, when it comes to shunning, I mean, Anthony Morris said, I think when they lost their funding in Norway, he quite emphatically stated that they will not change, they will never change the way they treat disfellowship people. So they need some help to change, a bit of strong arming. Anyway, the case was dismissed in its entirety. So the Jehovah's Witnesses are appealing this, and listening to what Carlos, the lawyer for the association, said, that it could be the end of this year that there might be a decision on that, whether they've succeeded in their appeal or not. And after that, I think he said they have 6 months to appeal to the European Court of Human Rights. And he thinks that they will do that will happen, and he kind of wants that to happen, because then the European Commission of Human Rights will have to have a very, very close look at what the Jehovah's Witnesses are doing. And he seems fairly confident in this judge's ruling, that it's very well founded or well grounded, lots of documentation to back it up. I don't think he thinks the Jehovah's Witnesses will be successful with their appeal, but then they will appeal to the European Court of Human Rights. So we'll see what happens. He reckons if that went ahead, it wouldn't be until 2026. So we're in this for the long haul. Anyway, getting back to the other court lawsuits, they are still waiting to get the verdict on Gabrielle's trial. I think you call it a trial. That's the person that does the media, is looking after social media for the Spanish Association. And Israel, who is the president, has yet to have his trial. So I don't know how that's, with this latest judgment, I don't know how that's, I don't know how it's going to go. So anyway, I think I've talked long enough, and hopefully you've got some sense out of some of it. Anyway, see you later. Bye.